Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Tokyo, midnight in London, afternoon in Sao Paulo, or evening in Mumbai, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Ethan Merrick stood in the center of a penthouse that cost more than he'd earn in 10 lifetimes, his work boots leaving faint dust marks on marble floors so polished he could see his own terrified reflection staring back at him. The air conditioning was cranked so cold it felt like walking into a meat locker, and the overwhelming scent of expensive cologne from the 3 men circling him made his stomach turn. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Construction dust still clung to his faded flannel shirt, dirt was caked under his fingernails, and he could taste fear in his mouth like copper pennies. Across from him, Isabel Westbrook's head of security, a man built like he'd spent 20 years in the military breaking people who didn't follow orders, stood with his arms crossed and his jaw set. Behind him, a lawyer in a suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent shuffled papers with the kind of cold efficiency that said he'd done this 1,000 times before. On a massive screen mounted to the wall, security footage played on loop. There was Ethan, clear as day, approaching a small girl outside a grocery store. There he was again, taking her hand, leading her away. The lawyer's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "We have everything on camera, Mr. Merrick. You took her." Ethan opened his mouth to explain, but his throat had closed up, and all that came out was a choked sound that might have been the beginning of a word. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind them, the city stretched out in a glittering sprawl of lights and life, but all Ethan could think about was his 7-year-old son sitting in the waiting area outside this room, scared and confused, probably wondering if his dad was about to be taken away in handcuffs. The sound of Ethan's own heartbeat pounded in his ears, so loudly he almost missed what the security chief said next. The man stepped closer, close enough that Ethan could see the small scar above his left eyebrow and smell the mint on his breath from whatever gum he'd been chewing to stay alert during what was clearly an interrogation. He pulled out a tablet and swiped through timestamps with the practiced ease of someone who'd built entire cases on less evidence than this. "You were seen with Ms. Westbrook's daughter for 4 hours before calling authorities," he said, his voice flat and accusatory. 4 hours, Mr. Merrick. Care to explain what you were doing with a 6-year-old girl who wasn't yours for 4 hours? Ethan tried to speak, tried to explain about the grocery store in the park and the police non-emergency line that had put him on hold for 15 minutes, but the lawyer cut him off with a raised hand and a look that said his explanation didn't matter because they'd already decided what kind of man he was. Then came the part that made Ethan's blood run cold. "We know about your financial situation, Mr. Merrick," the lawyer said, sliding a folder across the glass table that sat between them like a barrier between their worlds. "Medical debt, rent warnings, behind on utilities. Your son's school sent home a notice about unpaid field trip fees just last week. How did they know that? How did they know any of that?" The implication hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Did he see an opportunity? Did he see a little girl in designer clothes and think he could make some money? Did he plan to ransom her? The room started to spin and sweat broke out on Ethan's palms, making them slick and cold. The lawyer kept talking, kept building a narrative that painted Ethan as exactly the kind of desperate man who might do something unthinkable, and all Ethan could think about was Maya's terrified face when he'd found her crying and alone, how small her hand had felt in his, how she looked up at him with those big green eyes full of trust. He hadn't been thinking about money. He'd been thinking about how his own son would feel if he were lost and scared in a strange place. The lawyer slid a document across the table, the paper making a soft whisper against the glass. "Sign this statement, and we'll consider not pressing charges," he said, and Ethan looked down at the words that swam and blurred in his vision because fear and exhaustion had finally caught up to him. All he could think was that Liam couldn't lose another parent. Not after his mother. Not after 3 years of barely holding it together. Not like this. The penthouse door opened, and the sound cut through the tension like someone had paused a movie mid-scene. Every head turned. Isabel Westbrook walked in, and the air in the room changed instantly, the way it does when someone who owns everything and everyone in it enters their domain. She was still in business clothes from whatever meeting or event she'd been at when she got the call that her daughter was missing, her tailored navy suit perfectly pressed despite what must have been a frantic rush to get here, her dark hair pulled back in a style that probably had a fancy name Ethan wouldn't know. Her heels clicked against the marble with sharp, purposeful strikes that echoed in the silence. Everyone turned to face her, and Ethan watched her eyes scan the room with the kind of assessment that came from years of reading situations and people and knowing exactly what power she held. When her gaze landed on him, time seemed to slow down in that strange way it does during car accidents or moments that will change everything that comes after. She'd been told a man took her daughter. She'd been told he kept Maya for hours without calling anyone. She'd been prepared to see a monster, probably, or at least someone who looked the part. But something shifted in her expression as she took in Ethan's appearance, really looked at him standing there with his construction-worn hands hanging at his sides and his faded clothes that spoke of too many hours worked for too little pay and the genuine terror written all over his face. This wasn't the face of a predator. This was the face of a man who was scared out of his mind. Behind Isabel, a small voice called out, "Mommy!" The word was tentative, hopeful, and it came from Maya, who'd somehow broken free from the nanny's grip and was pushing past the adults who'd been keeping her in another room. The little girl ran through the doorway and past the security team and past the lawyers and past her own mother, her small feet padding quickly across the floor, and she threw her arms around Ethan's legs with enough force that he had to steady himself to keep from stumbling backward. "Don't let them take him!" Maya cried, her voice muffled against Ethan's jeans, her small body trembling with either exhaustion or emotion or both. "He saved me!" The entire room froze. You could have heard a pin drop on that expensive marble floor, and it would have sounded like a gunshot. Isabel's expression shifted from confusion to shock as she watched her daughter, the child she'd been terrified she'd lost forever, clinging not to her but to a complete stranger with a desperation that spoke of genuine attachment. Maya was crying now, the words spilling out between sobs. "He gave me his jacket when I was cold. He bought me food with his own money. He kept me safe when I was scared. He didn't hurt me. He helped me." The security team exchanged uncertain glances, their entire narrative crumbling in real time. Ethan knelt down to Maya's level because that's what you do when a child is upset, and his voice when he spoke was gentle despite the fear that was still coursing through him like electricity. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly, reaching out to wipe a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Your mom's here now. You're safe. Everything's okay." Isabel's eyes were welling with tears as she watched this man, this stranger she'd been ready to prosecute, speaking to her daughter with the kind of gentle patience that can't be faked. She saw the way Maya trusted him completely, the way she'd run to him for protection, the gentleness in his voice despite the obvious fear he must be feeling standing in this room surrounded by people who'd been treating him like a criminal. The door opened again, and Detective Sarah Crane walked in, a woman in her 40s with sharp features and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen too much to be easily fooled. She held a tablet in her hands, and her expression was carefully neutral. "Ms. Westbrook," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "I think you need to hear the full story." The detective started to explain what the fuller security footage showed, started to lay out the timeline that proved Ethan had done nothing wrong. But Ethan interrupted her because he'd had enough of this room and these people and this entire nightmare of a situation. "I should go," he said, his voice steady despite everything. "She's safe now. That's all that matters." He started to stand, started to extract himself from Maya's grip as gently as he could, started to walk toward the door where his son was waiting and his truck was parked and his regular life was calling him back. But Isabel's voice stopped him cold. "Wait!" There was something in her tone, something that made him pause with his hand almost to the doorknob. He turned back, and she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and confusion and realization. She looked down at her daughter, still standing near Ethan, still looking at him like he was some kind of hero from a storybook. Then she looked back at Ethan, and understanding dawned in her eyes. He was leaving, just leaving. No demand for a reward, no call to the media for his 15 minutes of fame, no threat of a lawsuit for how he'd been treated. He was just going to walk out of here and go back to his life like none of this had happened. "I need to know what happened," Isabel said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Please." Ethan hesitated, checking his watch because he was already late for his evening shift and his foreman was going to be pissed, and he couldn't afford to lose this job. Through the doorway, he could see Liam peering in with frightened eyes, his small face pale with worry. His son had already lost his mother. The fear in those eyes said he was terrified of losing his father too. Isabel followed Ethan's gaze and saw Liam, and something clicked into place. Single father, she realized. Just like she was a single mother. Two people trying to raise kids alone in a world that made it harder than it should be. Please, she repeated, and this time there were tears streaming down her face, all the fear and panic and relief of the last few hours finally breaking through the composed exterior. You saved my daughter. The least I can do is hear the truth. Ethan looked at his son's frightened face. He looked back at Isabel's exhausted, tear-stained face. He looked at Maya, who was watching him with those big green eyes full of trust. And slowly he nodded. Okay, he said quietly. It started 8 hours ago. If you're already hooked, this is exactly why Olivia the Storyteller exists, to bring you stories that grab your heart and don't let go. But here's the thing. So many people watch these stories, feel everything we're feeling right now, and then just scroll away without subscribing. If you're not subscribed yet, drop a comment and tell me why. What's holding you back? Because tomorrow I have another story that's going to hit even harder, and I don't want you to miss it. But I can't force you, it's your choice. Now, let's go back to 8 hours earlier. 8 hours earlier, Ethan's alarm had gone off at 5:30 in the morning with that piercing beep that always felt like it was drilling directly into his skull. He'd slapped at it in the dark, his hand connecting with the cheap plastic on the third try, and lay there for exactly 10 seconds, letting himself pretend he could go back to sleep before reality crashed in the way it did every single morning. Bills were stacked on the kitchen counter in a pile he'd been avoiding looking at too closely because looking at them meant confronting numbers that simply didn't add up no matter how many times he ran them through the calculator. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms in a complex that had seen better days about 20 years ago, but it was theirs, and he was determined to keep it that way even if the landlord had just slipped a notice under the door about a rent increase starting next month. He pulled himself out of bed and went to wake Liam, finding his son curled up under blankets, decorated with superheroes that were starting to fade from too many washes in the building's coin laundry. The morning routine was mechanical at this point, muscle memory taking over where his exhausted brain couldn't quite function yet. Cereal for breakfast because it was cheap and lasted, peanut butter and jelly for lunch because bread and a jar of each could stretch for 2 weeks if he was careful. Liam had complained while poking at his cereal with a spoon, his small voice cutting through the quiet morning. Dad, I'm tired of sandwiches. Can I have what the other kids have? Like those lunch packs with the crackers and cheese. And Ethan had felt that familiar stab of guilt in his chest, that feeling of failing his son in small ways that added up to one big failure. Not this week, buddy, he'd said, keeping his voice light, even though he wanted to put his fist through the wall. Maybe next week. The coffee maker sputtered and coughed like it was on its last legs, which it probably was, and morning light filtered through the cheap vinyl blinds that came with the apartment, the kind that never quite closed all the way. The smell of toast filled the small kitchen, the only hot breakfast he could afford to give his son most mornings. The drive to school in his old pickup truck was quiet, Liam sensing his father's stress the way kids always do even when you try to hide it from them. The check engine light had been on for 3 weeks now, and Ethan was ignoring it because he didn't have the money to fix whatever was wrong, and as long as the truck still ran, he'd keep driving it until it literally died on the side of the road. Other parents pulled up in newer cars, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been bought this season instead of 3 years ago at a clearance sale, and Ethan tried not to feel the weight of comparison, but it was there anyway, heavy and unavoidable. Liam's teacher caught him at drop-off with that apologetic smile that meant she was about to ask for money. Don't forget, the field trip to the Science Museum is coming up next Friday. It's $45 per student. Ethan's stomach dropped like he'd missed a step going downstairs. $45. He didn't have $45. Not with rent coming due, and the utilities and the groceries and the gas and everything else that lined up like dominoes waiting to fall. I'll get it to you by Friday, he heard himself promise, already calculating what shift he could pick up or what bill he could push back, or what he could sacrifice to make it work. Liam hugged him tight before running off to join his friends, and the kid whispered in his ear, "It's okay if we can't afford it, Dad." 7 years old and already understanding poverty in a way no child should have to. It broke something in Ethan every single time. The construction site was a renovation project in one of those neighborhoods where houses sold for millions, and Ethan couldn't even imagine having that kind of money, couldn't wrap his mind around what it must be like to not check your bank account before buying groceries or to not lie awake at night doing math that never quite worked out. His foreman Tommy Breslin was a decent guy, another dad trying to make ends meet, and he assigned Ethan to drywall work that had him breathing in dust all day while his back ached from positions that weren't meant to be held for hours at a time. Lunch break came, and he sat with the crew, all of them talking about bills and kids and survival in that way men do when they're too tired to pretend everything's fine. Someone joked about buying lottery tickets, and everyone laughed that desperate laugh that said they all knew it was a fool's hope, but what else did they have? Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from the school nurse saying Liam had a headache and panic shot through him because was his son sick and should he leave work, but he couldn't leave work because he couldn't afford to miss even an hour of pay. He texted back asking her to keep an eye on Liam and said he'd check after work, hating himself for choosing money over his kid, but knowing that without the money there'd be no home to bring his kid back to. The afternoon dragged in that way physical labor does, every minute stretching into 5, the hot sun beating down and sweat soaking through his shirt. At 3 o'clock his phone rang, and it was the school, and his heart stopped because what if something was really wrong, but it was just Liam asking if his dad would make it to his soccer game tomorrow. "I'll try, buddy," Ethan had promised, knowing he probably wouldn't because he'd already committed to a Saturday shift. "I'll really try." At 4:30 Tommy approached him and told him to knock off early, go pick up his kid, and Ethan was grateful because after-school care cost extra money he didn't have in the budget. He rushed through traffic, stressed about being late because Liam would worry, and arrived at 5:15 to find his son sitting on the school steps with his backpack, that small face lighting up when he saw his father's truck pull into the nearly empty parking lot. They headed toward the cheaper grocery store, Liam groaning because he hated that store but not complaining too much because even at 7 he understood they didn't have choices, and Ethan was already running through the calculations in his head of what they could afford and what they needed to make it through another week. Inside the store, Liam pointed at a box of sugary cereal, the kind with the cartoon character on the front, and Ethan had to explain gently that they couldn't afford it this week, feeling that guilt crush him again as his son's face fell. They compromised on the store-brand version, and Ethan added it to the cart with all the other bare essentials, the absolute minimum needed to survive. They were walking toward the checkout, Ethan's mind already moving ahead to dinner and homework, and trying to get Liam to bed at a reasonable hour, when his son tugged on his sleeve. "Dad," Liam said, his voice small and worried. "That little girl is crying." Ethan looked where his son was pointing and saw her near the entrance. A small girl, maybe 6 years old, with designer clothes that stood out in this discount grocery store, sitting on the floor with tears streaming down her dirty face. She was alone, completely alone, and shoppers were walking past her like she was invisible, everyone too busy or too uncomfortable or too wrapped up in their own problems to stop and help a crying child. Something in Ethan's chest tightened, that protective instinct that comes with being a father, that inability to see a scared kid and just walk away. "Stay close," he told Liam, and approached the girl carefully, kneeling down to her level, so he wouldn't tower over her and make her more scared. "Hey, sweetie," he said gently. "Are you lost?" The girl looked up at him with terrified green eyes, tears still streaming, and nodded. "Can't find your mom or dad?" Ethan asked, and her voice when she answered was so small and frightened it made his heart hurt. "Mommy," she whispered. "I can't find my mommy." Ethan made his decision in that moment, the only decision he could make as a human being with a heart and a conscience. "Okay," he said softly. "Let's find her together. What's your name?" "Maya," she said. And that's where Ethan's simple grocery run turned into something he never could have imagined. But before we continue, I want to ask you something. How many of you watch these stories, feel the emotions, connect with the characters, but never hit that subscribe button? Olivia the Storyteller puts hours into bringing you these journeys, and all I ask is that you subscribe so you never miss what happens next. If you haven't subscribed, comment below and tell me honestly what's stopping you, because I genuinely want to know. Anyway, let's continue with what happened next. Ethan stood up from where he'd been kneeling, Maya's small hand still in his, and Liam moved to his other side with that mix of curiosity and concern that kids get when they're watching their parents handle something serious. They walked together through the store toward the customer service desk where a middle-aged woman stood looking overwhelmed by a line of people with returns and complaints. And when Ethan finally got to the front and said, "Lost child, can you make an announcement?" she barely looked up from her computer screen. She sighed in that way people do when you're adding one more thing to an already impossible day, reached for the microphone, and made a half-hearted announcement that echoed through the store speakers. "Would the parent or guardian of Maya please come to customer service? Maya is waiting at customer service." They stood there waiting while shoppers pushed past with their carts, and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and time seemed to stretch out in that anxious way it does when you're hoping for something that isn't happening. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Maya was getting more agitated with every minute, her small voice asking, "Where's Mommy?" with increasing desperation, and Ethan knelt down again to comfort her, promising, "We'll find her, I promise," even though he had no idea if that was true. The manager suggested calling the police for a lost child, and Ethan agreed immediately, but while they were waiting he asked Maya if she knew her mom's phone number, and she shook her head no, so he tried a different approach. "Do you remember where you last saw her?" he asked, and Maya's answer came quickly. "The park. We were at the park." When he asked which park, she said the one with the big slide, and something clicked in Ethan's mind because he knew exactly which park she meant, Riverside Park, just 2 blocks south, the one with the massive playground equipment that all the kids loved. The manager told him police would take 20 to 30 minutes to arrive since it was a non-emergency call and the system was backlogged, and Ethan made a quick decision based on pure logic and a father's instinct. The park was 2 blocks away, and Maya's mother might still be there searching frantically for her daughter, so why wait here when they could actually reunite this child with her parent? He told the manager to let the police know they'd gone to Riverside Park, and she nodded absently, already distracted by the next customer demanding her attention, and Ethan led both kids out of the store and onto the sidewalk. They walked quickly toward the park with Maya's hand gripping his tightly, and she was calmer now, trusting him in that way children do when an adult shows them kindness and safety. Liam asked her how she got lost, and Maya explained with that simple child logic that makes perfect sense to a 6-year-old but sounds heartbreaking to an adult. "I saw a puppy," she said. "I followed it. When I turned around, Mommy was gone." It was the classic scenario, a child distracted by something interesting and not realizing how far they'd wandered until they were completely separated. They reached the park and Ethan scanned the area, but it was late afternoon now with fewer people around as dinner time approached, and there was no frantic woman searching and calling a child's name. He asked people if they'd seen a woman looking for a lost child and got nothing but head shakes and apologetic shrugs, and as the minutes ticked by and the park continued to empty, a cold feeling of worry started settling in Ethan's stomach. His phone showed 5:45, and the sun was getting lower in the sky, that golden hour before darkness that meant they didn't have much time left before it would be truly hard to search. Maya was shivering because she was wearing just a dress with no jacket, and without thinking twice Ethan pulled off his flannel shirt and wrapped it around her shoulders. The sleeves hung past her hands and the whole thing nearly swallowed her, but at least she was warmer. Liam stayed close to his father, sensing the worry even though Ethan was trying to hide it, and they checked the playground equipment and the walking paths and even the parking lot, but there was no one who looked like they were searching for a lost child. Maya said something that broke Ethan's heart into pieces. "Maybe Mommy went home without me?" she asked in that small voice, and the logic of it was devastating because to a 6-year-old it seemed like a reasonable explanation for why her mother wasn't here. "No way," Ethan said firmly, kneeling down to look her in the eyes. "Moms don't leave their babies. She's looking for you too. I promise." But privately, he was wondering where this woman could be and why she hadn't reported her child missing yet, unless she had and the information just hadn't filtered through the system. He tried asking Maya more questions to get helpful information. "What's Mommy's name?" he asked. "Isabel," Maya answered. "Isabel what? What's your last name?" "Westbrook." The name didn't register for Ethan because he wasn't someone who followed Billionaire news or read Forbes articles or paid attention to tech industry CEOs. He asked if she lived near here, and Maya thought about it before answering that they lived in a tall building with a doorman, which wasn't super helpful in a city full of apartment buildings. Ethan decided they needed to get back to the store and meet the police there, that this searching on their own wasn't working. They walked back toward the grocery store, and Maya mentioned she was hungry because she'd missed snack time, and Ethan's heart squeezed with sympathy for this little girl who was lost and scared and now hungry on top of everything else. He stopped at a hot dog vendor on the corner and ordered 3 hot dogs, handing one to each kid, and Maya devoured hers like she was starving while Ethan used up the last of his grocery money but didn't care because feeding a hungry child mattered more than his budget. When they got back to the store at 6:15, the manager told him the police had come and left already with instructions to call the station when the child was found. And Ethan felt frustration rising because what kind of system leaves a lost child without follow-up? But then he realized the system was overworked and understaffed, and dealing with hundreds of calls and a lost child who was currently safe probably wasn't their highest priority. He sat down on the curb outside the store with both kids and pulled out his phone to call the police non-emergency line. And while he waited on hold for 15 minutes listening to recorded messages about staying on the line, he watched Liam share half of his hot dog with Maya, that simple act of kindness that his son had learned from watching his father. When someone finally answered, Ethan explained the situation, and the officer told him to bring the child to the station where someone would meet him. When? Ethan asked, and the answer made his stomach sink. Could be a couple hours. We're processing a situation. It was 6:40 now, and Ethan's mind was racing through the logistics. If he took Maya to the police station and then waited a couple hours, Liam would be exhausted and still had homework to do and needed to get to bed at a reasonable hour because there was school tomorrow. Maya was clearly tired too, starting to droop against Ethan's side. The officer mentioned that he could wait where he was and they'd send someone when available, but that could be hours too, and sitting on a curb outside a grocery store with 2 exhausted children didn't seem like the right call. Ethan made a decision that seemed perfectly reasonable in the moment, but that he would later realize looked completely different through the lens of surveillance footage and security teams and lawyers. "I'll take her to my apartment," he told the officer. "Give her dinner, keep her safe and warm. Call me when you're ready." The officer took down his address and seemed fine with the arrangement, and Ethan hung up thinking he'd done the right thing, not realizing yet what he'd actually gotten himself into, or how those 4 hours would look to people who didn't understand the context. They walked to his truck, and Liam climbed in the middle with Maya by the window, and by the time they'd driven the 15 minutes to his apartment complex, Maya was already falling asleep with her head against the window. Ethan carried her inside to his small, modest apartment that was clean but worn from years of use and too many repairs he couldn't afford to make, and he laid her on the couch and covered her with a blanket. Liam whispered, "Is she going to be okay?" And Ethan whispered back, "Yeah, buddy. We'll find her mom," having absolutely no idea what he'd actually gotten himself into, or how the simple act of kindness was about to turn his entire life upside down. So Ethan made the call that seemed right in the moment, but would it come back to haunt him? That's what we're about to find out. But real talk for a second. Olivia the Storyteller brings you stories that make you feel, that make you think, that stay with you. And yet so many people watch, enjoy, and never subscribe. If that's you, drop a comment and tell me why you're hesitating. Is it the algorithm? Do you forget? Do you not think you'll watch again? I'm genuinely curious, because there are more incredible stories coming, and I want you to be here for them. Now let's see what happens next. Ethan's apartment felt even smaller with 3 people in it instead of 2, the worn couch sagging under Maya's weight and the small TV flickering with whatever channel had been left on from the night before. Photos of his late wife still hung on the walls because Ethan couldn't bring himself to take them down even 3 years later, and the whole place had that lived-in feeling of a home that was loved but couldn't afford upgrades. He made the simplest dinner he could think of, spaghetti with Jared sauce, because it was cheap and filling, and he knew kids generally liked it. Both children sat at a small kitchen table, and Maya woke up from her nap confused and disoriented, her eyes going wide with panic as she looked around at unfamiliar surroundings. "Where's Mommy?" she asked, her voice climbing toward hysteria, and Ethan knelt down beside her chair speaking gently the way he did when Liam had nightmares. "The police are looking for her right now," he explained. "You're safe here, I promise." He showed her his phone, pointed to the call log showing multiple attempts to reach the police station. "See, I told them exactly where we are. They're going to call as soon as they find your mom. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, trusting him in that way children do when an adult speaks to them with genuine kindness. Liam tried to cheer her up by showing her his collection of toy cars, the cheap plastic ones from the dollar store that were missing wheels or had chipped paint, and pretty soon both kids were making racing sounds and pushing cars across the table. They ate dinner together, and Ethan noticed Maya's table manners were sophisticated in a way that spoke of etiquette lessons and formal dining, clearly from a wealthy background, but he didn't comment on it. She thanked him quietly after finishing her plate, saying, "This is really good," and he smiled despite everything. "Just spaghetti, kiddo," he said. After dinner, Liam and Maya played with toys in the living room while Ethan called the police station again, and the officer who answered told him they were still processing other situations and to give them another hour. Ethan was frustrated but forced himself to be patient because losing his temper wouldn't help anyone. What Ethan didn't know was that 2 hours earlier, across the city in a penthouse that overlooked the glittering downtown skyline, Isabel Westbrook had realized her daughter was gone from the park and absolute panic had set in like a physical force, crushing her chest. Her heart was racing so fast she thought she might pass out, and she couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think straight, could only feel the raw terror of a mother who has lost her child. She'd immediately called the nanny who was supposed to be watching Maya, and when the woman claimed Maya had been right there just a second ago, Isabel fired her on the spot with words so sharp they could have drawn blood. She called her private security team, the expensive professionals she paid to keep her and her daughter safe, and she called the police, and within minutes searchers were being dispatched to the park while Isabel raced there herself from her corporate headquarters. When she arrived, there was chaos everywhere, security personnel and police officers and crowds of people who'd heard something was happening, but no Maya. Isabel's entire world was collapsing because she'd been divorced just 6 months ago, and that custody battle had been brutal and ugly, and she'd nearly lost Maya then. And now Maya was actually gone, and if something happened to her daughter, she couldn't even complete the thought because it was too horrible to contemplate. The police asked her questions about what Maya was wearing and whether there were any distinguishing marks. And Isabel remembered the silver bracelet, the expensive one with the tracking chip embedded inside, because she was paranoid about exactly this kind of situation. Her security tech pulled up the location history on his tablet, and the last ping had come from a grocery store 2 blocks away, and then the signal had just stopped. The security team rushed to that grocery store and pulled up surveillance footage, and what they saw made Isabel's blood run cold. There was Maya at 5:20 in the evening, crying near the entrance, clearly lost and alone. And then a man approached her, a man in work clothes with dirt on his jeans, and the footage showed him talking to her and taking her hand and leading her away. "Who is he?" Isabel demanded, and her security team was already running facial recognition software that spat out a name within seconds. Ethan Merrick, construction worker, widower, 1 child. The background check came back showing no criminal record, but there were red flags everywhere once you knew where to look. Financial trouble, significant medical debt, a recent warning notice from his landlord about unpaid rent. Bradford Keene, her head of security, and a former FBI agent who'd seen every kind of predator imaginable, looked at the data with suspicion written all over his face. "Mother's jewelry, expensive clothes," he said. He would have noticed. They pulled up more footage, showing Ethan at a hot dog stand paying for food, then leading both children away toward a parking lot and into a truck, and they captured the license plate and mobilized the team to find that vehicle. The police were now treating this as a potential abduction, and Isabel watched the footage over and over, her mind screaming, "He took my daughter," while a small voice in the back of her head whispered, "But he bought her food." Back at Ethan's apartment, it was 8:30, and Liam's bedtime had come and gone, but nothing about this evening was normal. Maya was on the couch watching a kids' show on TV and seeming calmer now, and Ethan was just starting to think maybe everything would work out fine when his phone rang with a blocked number. He answered, and a professional male voice said Mr. Merrick, and identified himself as Bradford Keene, head of security for Isabel Westbrook, and stated flatly, "You have her daughter." Ethan's confusion was immediate because, yes, he had her daughter. He'd explained this to the police hours ago. "Yes, I found her lost at," he started to say, but Keene cut him off, demanding his current location. Ethan gave his address, and Keene's response was cold and commanding. "Stay there. Do not leave. Police are being notified." The tone was aggressive and accusatory, and Ethan's stomach dropped as understanding dawned. "Wait, I called police hours ago," he tried to explain. "I'm keeping her safe until—" But Keen interrupted again. "You took a child and didn't immediately bring her to authorities." Ethan's frustration exploded. "They said to wait. I've been calling. The line went dead." His panic was rising now, real fear creeping in because this wasn't how this was supposed to go, and Liam appeared in the doorway asking, "Dad? What's wrong?" While Maya sensed the tension and asked in a small, scared voice, "Am I in trouble?" Ethan forced himself to sound calm. "No, sweetie. Your mom's on her way." 20 minutes later, someone pounded on the door, so hard it shook in its frame. And when Ethan opened it, there were 4 security personnel who looked like they could break him in half, and 2 police officers with their hands near their weapons. The lead cop asked, "Ethan Merrick?" And before Ethan could do more than confirm his identity, they were pushing past him into his apartment. Maya saw them and asked, "Where's Mommy?" And they assured her she was on her way while simultaneously telling Ethan he needed to come with them to answer questions. "About what?" Ethan demanded. "I found her lost and called you guys." But nobody was listening because a security guard was already searching his apartment in an invasive way that made Ethan's skin crawl, looking for what exactly? Evidence of a crime that never happened? Liam was terrified and crying, and Ethan tried to comfort him, but an officer said his son could either come to the station or they could call social services. And Ethan's rage was building, but he forced it down because losing control now would only make everything worse. "He comes with me," Ethan said firmly. They were escorted to vehicles, and Maya was confused and scared, and Liam was clinging to his father like a lifeline, and they drove not to a police station but to a downtown high-rise, and an elevator took them up to a penthouse with marble floors and modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows. And this was where we started, with accusations flying and security footage playing and a legal team ready to destroy Ethan's life, until Isabel walked through that door and Maya ran not to her mother but to Ethan, and everything changed. And there it is. Ethan's kindness turned against him, his good deed twisted into something sinister. But this is where the story gets really interesting. Now, I know some of you have been watching for 4 chapters and still haven't subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller. And I'm not here to force you, but I am here to ask, why not? What's the reason? Drop it in the comments, because I want to understand. Are you worried you won't like other stories? Do you forget to subscribe? Be honest with me. And trust me, you're going to want to subscribe for what comes next, because this story is about to take a turn none of us saw coming. Detective Sarah Crane stepped forward with her tablet in hand and a calm authority that cut through the tension in that penthouse like a knife through butter. She'd spent the last hour reviewing footage from multiple angles, pulling together a complete timeline that told the real story, and now she was going to show everyone in this room exactly what had happened. The footage started at 5:18 in the evening, showing Maya wandering alone in that grocery store, clearly lost and crying, and you could see other shoppers walking past her without stopping. At 5:23, Ethan appeared on screen, and his body language told the whole story if you knew how to read it, cautious and protective. The way someone approaches a scared animal, nothing predatory about it at all. The detective showed him talking to the store manager, showed him taking Maya to the park, and there was footage from the park cameras showing Ethan scanning the area, constantly looking for adults, asking people questions that witnesses had already confirmed. There was store footage of Ethan buying hot dogs for both kids with his own money, no coercion of Maya visible anywhere, just a man feeding hungry children. The detective had pulled his phone records, showing multiple calls to the police non-emergency line, and when she stated flatly that Ethan Merrick had followed protocol and that officers had been delayed due to other situations, Bradford Keene went silent in a way that spoke volumes. Isabel watched every single frame with tears streaming down her face, because there was her daughter in Ethan's truck looking calm and safe, and even smiling at one point, talking with Liam and sharing food, and the truth was undeniable. This man hadn't taken her daughter. He'd saved her when everyone else had walked past. The silence in the penthouse after the footage ended was thick enough to choke on. Isabel turned to face Ethan, and her makeup was running from tears, and when she tried to speak, her voice cracked on the first word. "Mr. Merrick, She couldn't find words adequate for what she'd almost done. Couldn't articulate the horror of realizing she'd been ready to destroy a good man's life because of fear and assumptions. She looked at Liam crying in the doorway, traumatized by what he'd witnessed, and she looked at Ethan's exhausted face with construction dust still clinging to his clothes, and the weight of it hit her all at once. This man had spent hours protecting a stranger's child while she and her team had treated him like a criminal. "I am so deeply sorry," she said, and the words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. She walked toward him slowly and tried to explain. "I thought, when I saw the footage without context, I thought the worst." Ethan nodded stiffly and said, "I understand," but the hurt was clear in his eyes, a wound that apologies couldn't quite heal. "You were protecting your daughter," he said. "I get it." But Isabel shook her head, because understanding didn't make it right. "But you didn't deserve to be treated like that," she said. Maya was still holding Ethan's hand, and Isabel noticed it, really noticed it, that her daughter trusted the stranger more than she trusted her own mother's expensive security team. "Thank you for keeping her safe," Isabel said, and Ethan gave his typical response. Anyone would have done the same. Isabel looked at her security team standing around the room, and her voice was sharp when she said, "But they didn't." Everyone else walked past her. She turned to her team, and her voice left no room for argument. "Leave us." Bradford started to protest with, "Ma'am, we should," but Isabel cut him off. "I said leave. Now." The team filed out reluctantly, followed by the police officers, and suddenly it was just the four of them in that massive penthouse, 2 adults and 2 children in a space designed for entertaining dozens. The awkward silence was broken by Maya asking, "Can Liam and I watch TV?" And Isabel was surprised by her daughter's comfort level but said, "Of course, sweetheart." The kids moved to the massive sectional couch in the living area and turned on cartoons, and Ethan and Isabel stood in the kitchen area near a coffee machine that was commercial-grade espresso equipment worth more than Ethan's monthly rent. "Can I offer you something?" Isabel asked. "Coffee. Food." Ethan checked his watch, showing 9:45, and said, "I should get Liam home. School tomorrow." But Isabel's voice came out urgent, almost desperate. "Please, stay just a few minutes. Please." There was something in her tone that made him pause, something raw and genuine, and he nodded slowly. They sat at the counter, and the marble was cold under Ethan's hands. Isabel made coffee, trying to regain her composure, and when she handed Ethan a cup, he noticed her hands were shaking slightly. She wasn't as composed as she wanted to seem. "How long was Maya with you?" she asked. "About 4 hours," Ethan answered. "And she felt safe the whole time?" "I hope so. I tried to make sure she did." Isabel studied him for a moment before saying, "You have a son." It wasn't a question. "Yeah, Liam. He's 7. It's just the 2 of you." Ethan hesitated before answering because this was the part that always hurt. "My wife died 3 years ago. Cancer." Isabel's expression shifted immediately. "I'm sorry," she said, and he could hear that she meant it. "Thank you. So you understand what it's like, too," she started, and Ethan finished for her. "To be a single parent terrified something will happen to your kid?" "Yeah." A connection was forming between them in that moment. 2 single parents from completely different worlds who shared the same bone-deep fear. "When I realized she was gone today, Isabel started but couldn't finish the sentence. "But she's safe now," Ethan said gently. "That's what matters." "Because of you," Isabel said, and when Ethan started to give his usual response, she cut him off. "Stop saying that." They didn't. They drank their coffee in silence, and Ethan could see Liam falling asleep on that expensive couch with Maya curled against him, and Isabel was watching her daughter being so comfortable with these strangers. "I want to give you something," she said finally, and Ethan tensed immediately. "That's not necessary." "A reward?" "I don't want money," Ethan said, and he said it firmly enough that it came across almost offended. Isabel was surprised because in her experience, everyone wanted money. Everyone had their price. "Mr. Merrick," she started, but he interrupted. "Ethan. Just Ethan. Ethan, you spent your evening, your resources, I did what any decent person should do," he said. "But you're in debt," Isabel said, and she watched his face change as he realized what she was saying. "My security team did a background check." Ethan stood up, anger flashing across his face. "That's really invasive." "I know. I'm sorry. But please, let me help." "I don't need charity," Ethan said flatly. "It's not charity. It's gratitude." They were at a standoff now, Ethan's pride pushing against Isabel's guilt. two immovable forces colliding. "I should go," Ethan said and started to move toward Liam to wake him up. "Wait," Isabel called out. "At least let me drive you home." "We're fine. Please. It's late. You have my daughter's jacket in your truck." That stopped him because it was true. He did have Maya's jacket. "I'll have my driver take us," Isabel said. Two parents from completely different worlds, one moment of kindness connecting them, but Ethan's pride is about to clash with Isabel's determination. Before we continue, I need to ask you something. Olivia the Storyteller creates these stories to bring people together, to make you feel something real. But only about 5% of viewers actually subscribe. If you're in the 95% who haven't, comment below and tell me why. Because I genuinely want to know what's keeping you from clicking that button. Now, let's see what happens when two stubborn people who've both lost spouses try to navigate this impossible situation. Isabel's driver pulled up in a black luxury sedan, the kind with windows tinted dark enough that you couldn't see inside and leather seats that probably cost more than Ethan's entire truck. Speaking of which, Isabel assured him his truck would be delivered to his apartment tomorrow morning, and Ethan was carrying Liam, who was half asleep and heavy in his arms when Maya insisted on coming along for the ride. "I want to say goodbye properly," she announced with a determination only a 6-year-old can muster, and so all four of them climbed into the back of that spacious car with its ambient lighting and climate control and the kind of comfort Ethan had only seen in movies. The contrast to his world was stark and unavoidable. They drove through the city, and Ethan watched the transition happen outside the windows, from gleaming downtown high-rises with their glass and steel to the working-class neighborhood where buildings had peeling paint and chain-link fences. Isabel was watching too, and he could tell she hadn't been to this part of the city in years, maybe ever. Maya was chattering to Liam about all her toys at home, telling him, "You should come play sometime," and both Ethan and Isabel tensed at the suggestion because kids don't understand class barriers yet, don't understand that their worlds aren't supposed to mix. The drive took 25 minutes, and when they pulled up to Ethan's apartment building with its shabby exterior and worn steps, Isabel's face stayed carefully neutral, but Ethan saw her register the reality of just how different their lives were. The car stopped and Ethan started to get out, shifting Liam's weight and saying, "Thanks for the ride," but Maya grabbed his hand before he could open the door. "Wait," she said, and then turned to her mother with eyes full of hope. "Mommy, can Ethan and Liam come to my birthday party?" Isabel opened her mouth to respond, but Maya kept going, the words tumbling out in excitement. "It's next Saturday at our house, with ponies and face painting, and—" Liam's eyes went wide at the mention of ponies because what 7-year-old wouldn't react to the promise of actual ponies, and Ethan tried to let them down gently. "That's really nice, Maya, but—" he started, but she interrupted him with, "Please? You're my hero." And Isabel could see her daughter's genuine affection for this man, could see Liam's hopeful face, knowing this kid probably never got things like ponies or face painting or birthday parties at estates. "Actually," Isabel said, making a decision in real time, "I think that's a wonderful idea." Ethan started to protest, but she cut him off. "Maya's right. You saved her birthday. She would have been lost during all the planning. Please come." Ethan was torn between wanting to say no because of pride and wanting to say yes because of the look on his son's face. "Can I think about it?" he asked, and Maya pouted immediately. "That means no." But Isabel pulled out a business card and handed it to him, thick cardstock with embossed lettering that read, "Isabel Westbrook, CEO, Westbrook Technologies," and that's when it finally registered for Ethan exactly who Maya's mother was. "I'll have my assistant send details," Isabel said. "If you can make it, wonderful. If not, no pressure." Ethan carried sleeping Liam toward his apartment building while Isabel and Maya watched from the car, and Maya waved goodbye through the window. Ethan turned and waved back, and there was something in that moment, some kind of human connection that transcended the obvious differences between them. Not billionaire and construction worker, just two parents who had survived a terrifying day together. The car pulled away, and Ethan climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment, unlocked the door with one hand while balancing Liam with the other, and carried his son straight to bed without bothering to wake him for pajamas because the kid was completely exhausted. He kissed Liam's forehead and then collapsed on his own bed fully clothed, checking his phone to see it was 10:30 at night and he had to be up at 5:30 in the morning. His body was aching from the physical work and the stress and everything that had happened, and he stared at that business card sitting on his nightstand. Isabel Westbrook, CEO. It was a different universe from his, a world where people had drivers and penthouses and security teams that could run background checks in minutes. He fell asleep with his phone still in his hand. The town car arrived back at Isabel's building, and Maya was asleep in her mother's arms. And Isabel carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed with its princess canopy and designer furniture that had cost more than most people's cars. She kissed her daughter's forehead, and Maya mumbled something without waking up. "Ethan's nice, Mommy." "He is, sweetheart," Isabel whispered. "Can we help him?" Maya asked, and it was that child's intuition that somehow understood Ethan was struggling, even if she didn't know the details. "Maybe we can," Isabel said, and Maya drifted back into deeper sleep. Isabel went to her home office and poured herself a glass of expensive red wine, sat at her desk, and pulled up the background check on Ethan again. She read through the details more carefully this time. Widower at 31, $180,000 in medical debt from his wife's cancer treatment, working 2 jobs but barely surviving. 1 child, no family support system. His work record was impeccable, and his references all called him reliable, hardworking, kind. He lived paycheck to paycheck, 1 emergency away from homelessness. Isabel felt her chest tighten because this man had saved her daughter when he had so little himself but gave freely, and then he'd refused reward and refused help because of pride. Isabel made a decision right there in her home office at 11 o'clock at night. She called her CFO, and he answered after 3 rings, because when the boss calls you answer no matter what time it is. "I need you to look into something," she said, and explained the situation with Ethan. Pull his financial records legally, through credit reports, public filings. Her CFO asked what she was planning, and Isabel's answer was simple. "Help, but he won't accept it directly. So I need to be creative." Her CFO knew that tone in her voice, knew she was determined, and wouldn't stop until she figured it out. She hung up and called the head of her charitable foundation with the same conversation, telling them to find a way to help without Ethan knowing it was from her. But how? She couldn't pay his debts directly because he'd refuse. Couldn't give him money because he'd be insulted. Couldn't offer him a job because he might see it as pity. It had to be subtle, organic, something he would accept without questioning. She thought about his skills, construction work, hardworking, reliable, and thought about her company's projects. Westbrook Technologies was building a new headquarters, and they needed skilled workers for the construction. Maybe that was it. The wheels were turning in her mind, because Isabel Westbrook hadn't built a billion-dollar company by giving up when things got difficult. If Ethan wouldn't accept help directly, she would find another way. And it started with that birthday party next Saturday. So Isabel's determined to help, but Ethan's pride stands in the way. Classic clash about to happen. But here's what I don't understand. Thousands of you are watching this unfold, feeling every emotion, rooting for these characters. And yet most of you aren't subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller. Why? I need to know. Are you planning to subscribe later? Do you not think you'll come back? Drop a comment and be honest. What's the reason you haven't clicked that button yet? Because I promise you, the stories keep getting better, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Now let's continue. Monday morning came too early, and Ethan was back at the construction site trying to fall into his normal routine, but his crew wanted to know where he'd been Friday night when he'd called and saying there was an emergency. Ethan explained briefly that he'd found a lost kid and things had gotten complicated, keeping the details vague because the whole situation still felt surreal. One of the guys teased him asking, "Bet she was rich, huh? Get a reward?" And Ethan just shook his head and said, "Nah, man. Just helped and went home." They all laughed, and someone called him, always the noble one, in that half-mocking, half-admiring way that working men do when they respect someone but won't say it directly. Ethan didn't mention the birthday party invitation because it felt silly even considering going, like that world wasn't his world and never would be. But Liam wouldn't stop talking about it. Every day after school it was, "Dad, can we go? There's going to be ponies." And Ethan would say, "I don't know, buddy, because how do you explain class differences to a 7-year-old? How do you tell your son that some worlds aren't meant for people like them?" "We'll see," he kept saying, which is what parents say when they don't want to say no, but know the answer probably is no. Then Wednesday came, and an envelope arrived at the apartment. formal invitation on expensive paper that felt thick and textured under Ethan's fingers. Maya Westbrook's 7th birthday celebration, it read, with an address in the wealthiest neighborhood in the city. Liam found it, and his face lit up like Christmas morning. We got invited. We're going, right? And Ethan's stomach was churning because he really didn't know if this was a good idea. That night after Liam went to bed, Ethan sat down with his laptop and Googled Isabel Westbrook, and the results were overwhelming. Forbes lists ranking her among the wealthiest self-made women in America. Tech articles about Westbrook Technologies and their innovations in cloud computing and AI solutions. Society pages showing her at galas and conferences and charity events, always perfectly dressed and perfectly composed like she'd never had a hair out of place in her entire life. Her net worth was listed at $3.2 billion, which was a number so large Ethan couldn't even really comprehend it. There were articles about her recent divorce, about how her ex-husband Nathan Westbrook had tried to get custody of Maya and failed spectacularly. Photos showed Nathan had run a PR company and helped build Isabel's brand in the early days, but the marriage had ended when he had an affair with an employee, and the divorce had been brutal and public and ugly. He tried to paint Isabel as a neglectful mother who cared more about her company than her child, but the courts hadn't bought it. Ethan read until 1 a.m, clicking through article after article, and by the end he understood something important. Her panic when Maya was lost made complete sense now. After nearly losing custody in that divorce, losing Maya physically must have been an absolute nightmare. Different world, but the same fears, the same terror that every parent feels when their child is in danger. Thursday, during his lunch break, Ethan's phone rang with an unknown number, and when he answered, a professional female voice said, "Mr. Merrick? This is Candace, Ms. Westbrook's executive assistant." His heartbeat picked up immediately. "Maya would really love to see you and Liam at her party," Candace said, and Ethan started to say he hadn't decided yet, but she cut him off gently. "Ms. Westbrook asked me to mention that it would mean a lot to Maya. She's been talking about you all week." The guilt trip was effective, and Ethan heard himself asking what time. Candace told him Saturday at 2 p.m, casual dress, and then added something that made Ethan's chest tight. Maya specifically requested no fancy clothes because she wants Liam to feel comfortable. This 6-year-old was more emotionally intelligent than most adults. Ethan sighed and said, "We'll be there," and Candace sounded genuinely pleased. "Wonderful. Address is on the invitation. Just give your name at the gate." Of course there was a gate. He hung up and the commitment was made, and when he told Liam after work, his son bounced with excitement, yelling, "Yes, ponies," while Ethan was considerably less thrilled, saying, "We'll go for a little while, okay?" But there was one problem. They didn't have a gift. Friday after work, Ethan took Liam to Target with a budget of $20 that he was already stretching to afford, and he stood in the toy aisles feeling completely lost because what do you get a billionaire's daughter? Liam suggested art supplies because Maya had told him she liked art, and they went to that aisle, but the expensive sets were way over budget and the cheap sets felt inadequate. Ethan's frustration was mounting because he couldn't compete with what her wealthy friends would bring, couldn't match the kind of presents a girl like Maya probably got all the time. Then Liam tugged his sleeve and said, "Dad, look," and pointed to the craft section where there was a wooden treasure box sitting unpainted for $8. A paint set was $6 and brushes were $3, total of $17. "We can paint it together," Liam said with excitement in his eyes. "Make it special." And Ethan smiled because that was perfect. That was exactly right. That night both of them sat at their small kitchen table painting the treasure box together, Liam choosing colors he said were Maya's favorites, purple with gold stars, and Ethan helping with details like flowers and a rainbow. It wasn't professional, but it was made with care and love, and Liam wrote inside the lid in his careful 7-year-old handwriting, "For treasures and secrets," from Liam and Ethan. They left it to dry overnight, and Ethan looked at it knowing it was a modest gift, but it was genuine, and that was all he had to offer. Saturday morning arrived, and Ethan's nerves were building with every passing hour. He showered and helped Liam get dressed in his nicest clothes, khaki pants, and a button-up shirt that were both from the thrift store, but at least they were clean and pressed. Ethan wore jeans and a clean flannel and his work boots because they were the only shoes he owned, and he felt inadequate, but this was all he had. The drive to the address took 45 minutes to the other side of the city, and Ethan watched the neighborhood change dramatically as they got closer, from modest homes to massive estates with gated driveways and lawns, so perfect they looked like paintings. Liam's eyes were wide and he whispered "whoa" as they passed house after house that looked like they belonged in magazines. They pulled up to the gate, an actual security gate with an intercom, and when the voice asked for his name, Ethan said, "Ethan Merrick and son Liam," and there was a pause before the gate swung open with a mechanical hum. They drove up a long driveway, and the estate came into view, and Liam breathed, "Dad, it's a castle." It wasn't quite a castle, but it might as well have been, a sprawling modern mansion of glass and stone that looked like something from a movie. Cars were parked in the circular drive, Range Rovers and Teslas, and Mercedes that made Ethan's beat-up truck stand out painfully. There were balloons tied to trees, and a massive bounce house on the lawn, and actual ponies in a riding ring, and children everywhere in designer clothes with parents wearing casual outfits that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. He gripped the steering wheel and said, "We can still leave," but Liam protested immediately. "Dad, no! We promised." Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, let's do this." Ethan's about to walk into a world where he doesn't belong, carrying a handmade gift to a party where other people probably brought designer toys. But here's my question for you. Why are you watching this story but not subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller? Thousands of you are here, invested, caring about Ethan and Liam, and yet you haven't hit subscribe. Drop a comment. Tell me honestly what's holding you back. Because I'm bringing you stories like this constantly, and I don't want you to miss them. Now, let's see what happens at this party. Ethan and Liam walked toward the party, carrying their handmade treasure box, and it suddenly felt so inadequate in Ethan's hands. This simple painted wooden box, when he could already see the gift table piled high with professionally wrapped presents in glossy paper and elaborate bows. Liam hesitated and whispered, "Dad, our gift is..." But Ethan cut him off firmly. "Perfect. It's perfect." A woman in an expensive pantsuit approached them with a clipboard and a professional smile, clearly the event coordinator. "Welcome." "Names?" she asked, and Ethan told her, "Ethan and Liam Merrick." She checked her list and her smile brightened. "Ah, yes. You're Maya's special guests." Special guests. That was somehow worse than just being regular guests, because now they were a spectacle. Now everyone would be watching them. She directed them toward the main area where the party was in full swing with 30 or more children running around and elegant parents mingling with champagne glasses and little plates of appetizers being passed by actual caterers. There was a face-painting station and a massive bounce house and a ring where ponies were giving rides, and everything about this party screamed money in a way that made Ethan's skin crawl with discomfort. He spotted Isabel talking with a group of parents, wearing casual designer clothes that probably cost more than his monthly salary, looking effortlessly beautiful in that way wealthy people do. She saw them, and her face lit up immediately, and she excused herself from her conversation and walked over. "You came," she said, and there was genuine relief in her voice. "Told you we would," Ethan replied. "Thank you. Maya's been watching for you." Before anything more could be said, there was a shout from across the lawn. "Liam!" Maya was running toward them with her dress flying behind her, and she hit Liam with a hug so enthusiastic it almost knocked him over. "You're here. Come see the ponies." She grabbed his hand and started pulling him away, and Ethan started to follow, but Isabel touched his arm lightly. "They're fine. Let them play." He watched the kids run off together with pure joy on both their faces, and other adults started drifting over because they were curious about these new arrivals. "Isabel, who's this?" someone asked, and Isabel introduced him. "Ethan Merrick. He's the man who found Maya last week." The reactions were mixed, some people showing genuine warmth while others gave him that assessing look that people with money give to people without it. One woman in a designer outfit with judgment already in her eyes asked in a tone that was trying to sound friendly but came out condescending, "Oh, how wonderful. What do you do, Ethan?" It was a loaded question and they both knew it. "Construction," Ethan said simply. "How interesting," the woman replied in a dismissive tone that said she found it anything but interesting. Isabel's jaw tightened and her voice came out sharp. "Ethan saved my daughter's life." The woman retreated quickly after that. Another parent, a man who seemed genuinely kind, said, "That was really brave and meant it." The conversation continued, but Ethan felt his otherness acutely, surrounded by people talking about investment portfolios and vacation homes and private schools, speaking a language he didn't understand and couldn't relate to. He excused himself, saying he was going to check on Liam, and walked toward the pony area where his son was in line, bouncing with excitement. Maya was next to him, chattering away about something, and when they climbed onto the ponies with attendants helping them, Liam's grin was so wide it could have split his face in half. Ethan stood there watching and trying to remember the last time he'd given his son something this special, and he couldn't remember. His son was experiencing joy that was probably normal here at this estate, but was absolutely magical for them. Another father approached and asked, "Your boy?" And Ethan nodded. "Yeah, he friends with Maya. They met last week." "Ah, you're the one who found her." The word had spread apparently. The man extended his hand. "James Vance, you did a good thing." The handshake was firm and respectful. "Just did what anyone should," Ethan said automatically. "But most don't," James replied. "That matters." It was the first genuine connection Ethan had felt at this party. They stood watching the kids together, and James mentioned that Isabel was good people, that she'd been through hell with her divorce. "Yeah, I read about it," Ethan admitted. "But she's got her daughter. That's what counts." Ethan nodded, because he understood that completely, understood that as long as you had your kids safe, everything else was secondary. The party continued with cake and singing, and then the present opening, and Maya sat surrounded by a pile of expensive toys and electronics and designer clothes that would probably be forgotten by next week. She got to Ethan and Liam's gift, that small painted box among all the professional packages, and opened it. There was silence as she saw the handmade treasure box, and Ethan's stomach dropped because she hated it. She had to hate it compared to everything else. But then Maya's face transformed. "I love it," she shouted, holding it up for everyone to see. "Mommy, look. They painted it for me." Isabel's expression was surprised and touched, and she read the note inside, and tears filled her eyes. Maya ran to Ethan and Liam, announcing, "It's my favorite present." And the other parents looked politely confused, because how could a handmade gift be her favorite? But Isabel understood. Everyone else had brought expensive things that money could buy. Ethan and Liam had brought heart, had brought time and care and genuine affection, and that was worth more than any amount of money could measure. The party started winding down, with kids still playing and adults mingling, and Isabel approached Ethan again. "Thank you for coming. And for that gift." "It wasn't much," Ethan said, but Isabel shook her head. "It was everything." There was a pause heavy with meaning, and then she asked, "Can we talk?" "Privately." Ethan's pulse quickened, but he nodded. "Okay." She led him to a quieter area of the property, a garden with beautiful landscaping that had probably cost more than Ethan would make in 5 years. "I've been thinking all week about how to say this," Isabel began, and Ethan waited because he had no idea where this was going. "I want to help you." He tensed immediately. "Ms. Westbrook," Isabel. "Please." "Isabel, we've been through this. Hear me out. I have a proposal." "I don't want charity," Ethan said flatly. "It's not charity. It's a job." That stopped him cold. "What?" "My company's building new headquarters. Massive construction project. We need skilled workers." Ethan was immediately suspicious. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity. Same as anyone else." "Convenient timing," he said, the skepticism clear in his voice. "Maybe, but I checked your references. You're good at what you do." "I already have a job. That pays half what this would." Ethan's mind was racing, because more money meant stability, meant he could afford field trips and better food, and maybe even save something for emergencies. "I don't want special treatment," he said. "You wouldn't get it. You'd earn every penny." The silence stretched between them, and it was tempting, so tempting, but his pride and his fear of being someone's charity project were warring with his practical need. "I need to think about it," he finally said. "Of course. But Ethan..." He looked at her, and she held his gaze. Sometimes accepting help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. And there's the offer that could change everything. But will Ethan's pride let him accept it? We're about to find out. But first, real talk. You've been here for 8 chapters, feeling every moment of the story. And if you're still not subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller, I have to ask why. What's stopping you? Is it that you don't think you'll come back? Do you just forget to hit the button? Comment below and tell me, because I genuinely want to understand. These stories take hours to craft, and all I ask is that you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now let's see Ethan's decision. The drive home from the party was quiet except for the sound of Liam's soft breathing as he slept in the passenger seat, completely exhausted from the excitement of ponies and cake and playing with Maya. But Ethan's mind was churning with thoughts he couldn't turn off, replaying Isabel's job offer over and over. Better pay, actual benefits, stable work that would mean he could stop living on the edge of financial disaster. But accepting it felt like giving in, like admitting that he'd failed to provide for his son on his own, like acknowledging he couldn't make it without help from someone else. He pulled into his apartment parking lot and saw his landlord posting an eviction notice on someone else's door, and it was a harsh reality check because how long before that was his door? He carried Liam upstairs and put him to bed without waking him, then sat down at his kitchen table with the bills spread out and his calculator in hand. Rent was due in 2 weeks at $1,400. His current bank account had $847. His next paycheck would be $680 after taxes. The math didn't work. It never did. He could pick up extra shifts, but he was already working 60 hours a week and barely seeing Liam as it was. Isabel's offer was $20 an hour when he was currently making $18, and it came with benefits which meant health insurance for Liam and no more going uninsured and praying nothing bad happened. It meant he could actually save money for emergencies. It meant he could breathe. He stared at Isabel's business card on the table for an hour before finally picking up his phone and dialing the number. Her assistant answered with a professional, Ms. Westbrook's office, and Ethan said, "This is Ethan Merrick. Is she available?" There was a moment of hold music, something classical and expensive sounding, and then Isabel's voice came on the line. "Ethan, I want to accept the job." He could hear the smile in her voice when she said, "I'm glad. But I need to be clear about something," Ethan said, because this was important. "Okay, I won't take charity. If I'm not good enough, fire me. If I screw up, no special treatment." "Agreed," Isabel said immediately. "And I need this to be real. Not because of what happened." "It is real," she assured him. "I called your current foreman. He said you're the best worker he has." Ethan hadn't known that, and his throat went tight with emotion. "When do I start?" "Monday. I'll have HR contact you tomorrow with details." "Thank you," Ethan said, and Isabel's response was soft. "No, Ethan. Thank you. For everything." He hung up and sat in silence, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt something that might have been hope. Sunday morning started peaceful with Liam's soccer game, an event Ethan actually had time to attend for once, and they were leaving the apartment when his phone rang with an unknown number. He answered, and a man's voice said Ethan Merrick, and when Ethan confirmed it, the voice continued, "This is Nathan Westbrook." Ethan's blood ran cold because this was Isabel's ex-husband, the man who'd lost custody and tried to paint her as a bad mother. "How did you get my number?" Ethan demanded. "Doesn't matter. We need to talk." "I don't think we do. About Isabel and my daughter. Maya's safe. That's all that matters." Nathan's voice took on an ugly edge. "Is it? Or did you see an opportunity? Construction worker finds billionaire's kid. Suddenly gets job offer? Convenient." Ethan's rage was building, but he kept his voice controlled. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know opportunists when I see them. And I know Isabel makes impulsive decisions when emotions are involved." "This conversation is over," Ethan said. "She'll hurt you when you're no longer useful. It's what she does." Ethan hung up with his hands shaking, and Nathan's words already worming their way into his head. What if he was being used? At Liam's soccer game, Ethan was distracted, his mind replaying Nathan's accusations, and when Liam scored a goal and looked for his dad's reaction, Ethan applauded, but it was automatic, his thoughts elsewhere. What if Nathan was right? What if Isabel was just assuaging guilt? Was the job offer genuine, or was it pity dressed up as opportunity? After the game, Liam asked what was wrong, and Ethan said nothing, buddy. Just tired. His phone buzzed with a text from Isabel saying, "HR will call you tomorrow. Looking forward to working together," and he stared at the message but didn't respond. That night he couldn't sleep, lying awake weighing his options. Take the job and risk being her charity case, but Liam benefits. Refuse the job and maintain his pride, but stay in poverty. What would his wife have wanted? She would have said, "Swallow your pride. Our son needs security." But accepting felt like admitting defeat, like admitting he couldn't do it alone. At 3 a.m, he was still awake, and he realized this wasn't about him. It was about Liam. The decision was made. Monday morning at 6, his phone rang again, and it was Nathan. "Last chance to walk away," Nathan said, and Ethan's patience was completely gone. "What do you want?" "Isabel uses people. Gets what she needs, discards them." "You mean like you used her?" "Before cheating." Ethan shot back, and there was silence on the line. "You don't understand what you're getting into." "Maybe not. But I understand you're her ex trying to mess with her life." "I'm protecting my daughter from strangers," Nathan said. "Where were you when Maya was lost? Where were you during the custody battle you lost?" Ethan demanded. Nathan's voice hardened. "If you hurt my daughter, I already saved her. Which is more than you've done. This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Ethan said and hung up. But Nathan sent a final text that just said, "Watch your back," and the threat was clear. Ethan forwarded all the messages to Isabel, and her response was immediate. "I'm so sorry. He's trying to intimidate you. Ignore him." Ethan typed back, "Is he dangerous?" And she replied, "No. Just bitter. I'll handle it." "You sure?" "Promise. See you at job site." Ethan took a deep breath and typed, "Yeah. See you there." Ethan's made his choice despite Nathan's threats, but is he walking into something more complicated than he realizes? We're heading into the final moments where everything comes together. But before we get there, I have to say this. You've stuck with me for 9 chapters. You're invested in Ethan, Liam, Isabel, and Maya. And yet so many of you still haven't subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller. I'm not trying to guilt you. Wait, yes I am. Because if you've come this far and you like what you're experiencing, why wouldn't you want more of this? Drop a comment and tell me what's keeping you from subscribing. Because the resolution is coming, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Monday morning came, and Ethan arrived at the Westbrook Technologies construction site, feeling his nerves bundled tight in his stomach. This was a massive project, a 40-story headquarters that would take years to complete, and the scale of it was intimidating. The site foreman was a woman named Rosa Delgado who had a no-nonsense demeanor and the kind of experience that showed in every movement. She looked at him and asked, "You Merrick?" And when he confirmed it, she said, "Heard good things. Don't make me regret hiring you." That hit him in a way he hadn't expected, because it meant Rosa had run his references and made the final hiring decision herself. This wasn't just Isabel pulling strings. It felt more legitimate, more earned. "I won't," Ethan promised. She assigned him to structural work on the foundation, hard labor that required specialized skills, and he worked alongside 50 other crew members who had no idea about his connection to Isabel. To them, he was just another worker, and that's exactly what Ethan wanted. He proved himself through his actions by showing up on time, demonstrating his skills, and never complaining about the work. At lunch, Rosa approached him and said, "You're good? Where'd you learn to work like that?" And Ethan told her he'd been doing construction for 10 years. "Well, keep it up. We need reliable guys," she said, and pride swelled in Ethan's chest because this was earned, not given. His first paycheck would come next Friday, and for the first time in 3 years, it would cover rent with money left over. 3 months passed, and Ethan's life had transformed in ways he hadn't thought possible. He had stable income, health insurance, a savings account that was small but growing. Liam was thriving with new clothes that weren't from the thrift store, healthy food on the table, and school field trips paid without the crushing stress that used to accompany every expense. Ethan saw Isabel occasionally at the construction site when she came to oversee progress on the project, and they maintained a professional relationship that was friendly but had clear boundaries. Until today, when she approached him during lunch break and asked, "Ethan, can we talk?" His heart rate picked up, but he said sure, and they walked away from the crew. "How are you finding the work?" she asked. "It's great. Really. Thank you again. You've thanked me enough. You've earned your place here," she said, and there was a pause before she continued. "I wanted to ask you something personal." His guard went up immediately. "Okay." Maya's been asking when she can see Liam again. Ethan hadn't realized the kids missed each other. She talks about him constantly. About the treasure box, about how kind he was. Liam mentions her too, Ethan admitted. Would you be comfortable with them spending time together? A playdate, maybe. Ethan hesitated because this felt like crossing a professional line, but then he thought about Liam's face lighting up whenever Maya was mentioned. Yeah, I think Liam would like that. Isabel's relief was visible. How about Saturday? At the park? Neutral territory. They met at Riverside Park, the same place where everything had started, and the kids were immediately inseparable, running and playing and laughing with the kind of pure joy that only children can access. Ethan and Isabel sat on a bench watching them, and it was awkward at first until Isabel said, "I never properly thanked you. You gave me a job. That's thanks enough. Not for the job. For being kind when no one else was." "You would have done the same," Ethan said, and Isabel looked at him. "I hope so, but I'm not sure." They watched their kids, and the conversation flowed easier after that, talking about their children and their late spouses and the particular loneliness of single parenting that nobody else really understood. Isabel admitted that most people wanted something from her, money or connections or access to her world. "I just wanted to help a lost kid," Ethan said. "I know. That's why Maya loves you," Isabel replied, and after a pause she added, "and why I trust you." Something shifted between them in that moment. 6 months after that first day at the construction site, Ethan and Liam had become regular guests at the Westbrook estate, not because of any obligation, but because of genuine friendship that had developed naturally. Maya and Liam were like siblings now, and between Ethan and Isabel there was something more, though neither of them was acting on it because it was complicated and their worlds were still so different. On this particular Saturday, they were having dinner at Isabel's house with the kids playing in the game room while the adults cooked together in the kitchen, Isabel insisting on normal activities that made her feel human. There was a comfortable silence as Ethan chopped vegetables and Isabel made pasta sauce, and she said quietly, "This is nice." "Yeah," he agreed. "I haven't felt this normal in years." He looked at her and saw her without makeup, in casual clothes, just being herself. "Me neither," he said. The moment hung between them, and Isabel started to say Ethan, but the kids burst in asking if they could watch a movie. The moment was broken, but not lost. They settled on the couch with the kids between them, and halfway through the movie both children had fallen asleep, and Ethan and Isabel's eyes met over their children's heads. A small smile passed between them. This was family. Not traditional, not planned, but real. 1 year after that first day, Ethan was now a site supervisor, promoted on merit because of his work ethic and skills. Liam was in a better school that Ethan could actually afford. The medical debt from his wife's cancer treatment was paid off completely. They'd purchased a small house, modest but theirs, the first home they'd owned since his wife died. Today was Maya's 8th birthday party, a smaller gathering this year with just close friends, and Liam and Maya were as inseparable as ever. Ethan and Isabel were officially dating now, taking it slowly and carefully because they both had children to think about. Nathan had tried some legal action months ago, but it had failed because he had no grounds, and he'd eventually disappeared from their lives entirely. When it was time for cake, Maya made a wish and blew out her candles, and later Isabel asked what she'd wished for. Maya grinned and said, "Can't tell." But it already came true, and she looked at Liam and then at Ethan. Her found family. Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from his former foreman saying, "Heard about your promotion. Proud of you, man." He looked around at this life that had been built from one moment of kindness, at Isabel beside him and Liam laughing with Maya. It was a different world than a year ago, not because of money, though the stability certainly helped, but because of connection and trust and love that had been earned through actions. He hadn't needed rescue. He just needed a chance, and he'd given the same thing to a lost little girl. And that's where Ethan's story comes full circle, from a man drowning in debt and despair to someone who found family in the most unexpected place. One moment of kindness changed everything. But here's what I need to say. If you made it through all of this story, if you felt every moment, cried, smiled, or rooted for these characters, and you still haven't subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller, then I have to ask you directly, why not? You just invested over an hour in this story. You clearly enjoy what we do here. So what's stopping you from subscribing? Drop a comment and tell me honestly, because I need to understand. Are you planning to come back? Do you forget to subscribe? Do you not think other stories will be as good? I'm asking because Olivia the Storyteller exists to bring you these emotional journeys, and I don't want you to miss the next one. So please, if you're not subscribed, do it now. Click that button. And if you refuse, at least tell me why in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next story. The final scene of their story, or at least this portion of it, happened at sunset in their favorite diner, the one where everything had started 3 years ago when a billionaire had decided to meet a nurse as an equal rather than a charity case. The coffee was still terrible, the vinyl booths were still cracked, and the normalcy of it all was a choice they'd made deliberately, a rejection of the expensive restaurants and exclusive events that Elias's wealth could have bought them. This was real, this was them, and this was enough. His confession came over refills that the waitress had long since stopped charging them for, his nervous energy visible in the way he kept adjusting his coffee cup and avoiding her eyes. "I have something to ask you," he started, and Imani's immediate nervousness made her tense. "Elias," she began, but he cut her off gently. "Do you trust me?" The question hung between them, loaded with history and weight and the memory of 3 months when trust had been tested and broken, and slowly, painfully rebuilt. Her answer came after a moment of genuine consideration, because she'd learned that honesty mattered more than easy comfort. "I'm learning to. Every day, I trust you a little more. Every day, you show me I'm right to trust you." His smile was nervous, almost boyish, so different from the polished businessman who'd walked into St. Michael's emergency room 3 years ago. "Good. Because I'm terrified." Her confusion was evident. "Of what?" His answer was raw and vulnerable, the kind of admission that cost him something to make. "Of losing you again. Of messing this up. Of doing something that makes you walk away and realizing too late that I've destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me." Her response was immediate and tinged with the humor that had become their way of healing old wounds. "Then don't fake your death again. Simple rule. Maybe write it down if you need a reminder." Their laughter filled the diner, drawing fond looks from the waitress and the handful of other patrons who'd witnessed their reunion over the past year and had invested themselves in the outcome of this improbable love story. His hand covered hers on the scarred table, his touch warm and steady and present. "I love you," he said, and the simplicity of the words made them more powerful than any elaborate declaration. "The real me loves the real you. Not the version of me who thought money could solve everything, or the version of you who thought she had to do everything alone. Just us. Just this." Her answer came through tears that were happy and healing, through a smile that had taken a year to feel natural again. "I love you too, even when you're an idiot. Especially when you're an idiot, because at least then I know you're being honest." The final image of their story is this. 2 people who survived betrayal and grief and lies and their own worst instincts, who came through fire and chose not to let it consume them, who learned that love isn't about perfection or grand gestures or surveillance rooms and protection details. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other repeatedly, about Wednesday night coffee and terrible diner food and honest conversations that sometimes hurt but always matter. It's about daisies on a grave that marks a death that never happened and a life that almost ended but didn't. They're still choosing each other, will keep choosing each other tomorrow and next week and next year, for as long as choice remains possible and love remains real. No more graves, no more ghosts, no more surveillance cameras watching from the shadows. Just 2 people who learn the hard way that love earned through fire is the kind that lasts forever, that trust rebuilt is stronger than trust that was never tested, that sometimes you have to lose everything to learn what actually matters. Just love, real and messy and complicated and absolutely worth every single moment of pain it took to get here. That's the end of the story. But if you're not subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller, you're going to miss dozens more just like it. This is your absolute last chance. Hit that subscribe button right now. And if you're still not going to do it, I need you to comment below and explain what's wrong with you. I'm serious. I want to understand the psychology of someone who watches an entire hour-long story and then chooses not to subscribe. Enlighten me. Everyone else, welcome to the family. See you in the next story.